Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Minh and I'm your host from NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today I have a special guest speaker, Ben Burns from Preferred Homes in Brisbane. Ben, hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Minh. How are you?
Good, thank you. For our listeners, I met Ben probably almost 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. I looked at one of his first builds in the Brisbane Gold Coast region. It was a FA, fully accessible house for SDA. And Ben reached out to us about 2 weeks ago, and I thought it'd be nice to bring him in and listen to how the brand Preferred Homes has gone on their SDA journey the last few years, and understand more about what they've learned from the whole SDA journey as to challenges, wins, concerns and misinformation or whatnot. So our listeners who are either providers, investors, participants and other builders and developers can understand that it's not smooth cruising in the SDA world. And we all learn from our journeys. And Ben, you are here to talk to us about your journey with you and your business partner, Marcus. Ben, who is Preferred Homes and what does it do and why do you exist in the current world of SDA?
Yeah, I suppose that Preferred Homes was originated more as a custom home building company. We build very challenging blocks generally, a variance but not so much a volume builder. Then we got into the SDA space through a good friend of mine who works for a very large provider. We became a panel member for them to build. And throughout that process, we've got a very good understanding. It's been 3 years now that we've been building SDA, from standard investment group homes through to duplexes, detached duplexes. And it's been quite the process, but we've enjoyed it.
So it sounds like you are a custom builder here, Ben. Is that true? And if so, what does that mean to our listeners? Definitely a custom builder. As I mentioned, we've been through the path of standard SDA designs, which I suppose the feedback from our providers is they want something that's been built specifically for their participants and for the people that are going to be living in the homes. So we've taken that on board and I suppose gone from a standard plan to a design and construct model where we are working with the providers. We're working with, whether it be an investor or a mum and dad, to make sure that we're getting the exact plan right for the people that are going to be living in the home. So that's, I suppose, the change from when we first started SDA to where we are now. So that means that if a provider or participant were to go to another builder who is not a custom builder for SDA, that means there's a few challenges for them to work with these builders. And then I'm asking these questions to help our listeners understand that it's not easy going to a non-custom builder for SDA, is it, Ben?
Yes, it's pretty much that's the case. I believe you walk through into more of a cookie cutter approach, which is more of it's more palatable for an investor to look at a house and land package, see the pricing, understand the process that they need to take as far as getting to contract and to build. Whereas when you go down the design and construct, maybe a little bit more challenging to understand, but we understand that the requirements should be looked at from a provider's perspective and from a sales perspective rather than from the investment perspective, because you're going to want to spend a little bit more time on design and you're going to want to spend a little bit more money to make sure you're in the right locations. Just taking on the feedbacks from the provider to make sure that you've got participants in your home once it's complete. You don't want to be sitting there with vacant rooms.
Totally understand, Ben, and I want to poke you again. Right, and this is not to offend you. The word design to construct or design to construct. I mean, surely every builder says those words, right? And it sounds very easy. What does design to construct mean compared to a non-design construct process?
Yeah, so I suppose the process we take is when somebody comes to us to look at a particular project, say they've got a block of land that they need a knockdown rebuild or a vacant lot ready to go and they want to build SDA, we'll arrange a meeting with ourselves, the designer, and if there's a provider already there in the background, we'll take into consideration everything as we go through. We sit down with our designer, we go through all of the concept ideas that we need to include in the property that not only works for the provider, but is obviously suitable for the block of land that we've got to work with. We look at everything from certification standpoints through to SDA certification and make sure that we get the best plan possible for the block, for the provider, and I suppose as cost-effective outcome as we can for the client and owner as well.
Yeah, gotcha. So I guess talking to you offline outside of this podcast, you mentioned to us in our office here, to our team, that you specialise in more different field of SDA, design and construct, as you say. You're working very closely with providers for construction, for the providers who are buying it directly. So when you say for providers, we don't mean for a provider on behalf of an investor, it's for the actual provider, number one. And number two, you also talk about a lot working with families, so families with participants who are in their children in the family who are participants on the NDIS, bespoke design and build delivery for such participants, number two. And you also mentioned the word knockdown rebuild, which we don't really hear often from other builders, the word knockdown rebuild. So I guess, Ben, those three factors there, building for providers, building for families, and knockdown rebuilds are a point of difference, don't you agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree. The way we see it, from an ethical standpoint, we believe that building these homes for the right reasons and for the right people, the way they should be built, is high on our list of priorities. At the end of the day, it's still good for the investor, but we've got a strong focus on making sure that we're building ethically, making sure we're in the right locations. We're listening, we're understanding, and we're providing what's required. So
cool. Ben, tell us more about these locations as you refer to in Brisbane and South East Queensland, please.
Yeah, so I mean we've got a project in Jindalee at the moment, which it's got a provider who's very, very keen, can't wait for the construction to be complete so that they can have their participants move in. We've got another one in Chermside. It's going to be another great project. Obviously, a little bit more challenging to find the land in Chermside, but
so the Chermside one, is there a land yet?
Yes.
So who's it being built for? What's the design category and how many rooms and what's the specs for that?
Yeah, for that particular block, you're looking at a 600 square metre block, generally around 20 metre frontage by 30 metres deep. We're building a duplex style setup. So you've got a party wall in the middle. You've got a 2-bedroom one side and a 1-bedroom on the other side. And we're getting it through as a community residence. So,
can I ask you a technical question here? In my mind, I'd call that a dual lock product, but you're calling it a duplex because it's 2 in 1. Please clarify, please.
Well, I suppose they're much of a muchness. A dual lock application is very similar to duplex application. The difference here is because we're utilising community residents through our certifiers, it means that we do not need to separately title the land or the dwelling, and we can avoid infrastructure charges and DA applications.
I got the impression from years ago, Ben, and please educate me and my listeners, us and our listeners. The Brisbane City Council don't really like the whole duplex kind of design approvals. I mean, the terminology community residence, that's a new terminology to our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
Please explain to us what community residence means.
So community residence, it's just a guideline around what you can do for, I suppose, care facilities. There is another line that is called care facilities, but community residence just has a stricter guideline on it as to how many people are allowed to be living there permanently, how many carers are allowed to be there in a 24-hour period, all things like that, parking requirements. But because of that, because it's known as a care facility, you can effectively avoid having to pay the infrastructure charges. You only need to pay one infrastructure charge on the block. They just consider it differently than they do if you were to build a standard dwelling.
Sure. So you mentioned just before how many carers can be there in a 24-hour period. So what are those rules? Can you?
Yeah, so I believe it's 7 carers maximum within a 24-hour period that can be on site. As far as the residents are concerned, you're capped out at 6 people, including a carer, and that's for permanent living.
Yeah. So from my memory, from other discussions from other architects and designers, they said, it's possible that if there's a breach of those numbers of carers on site and a neighbour complains, council will be aware, they'll come and they'll watch, they'll count the numbers, and if there really is a breach of those rules, the council can shut down that operation.
Yes.
In theory, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So community residents must be, it's not a loophole, it's just simply a more complex kind of project to deliver.
Yeah, there's I suppose there's just a few more rules around it, but the benefits of going down that path will outweigh the restrictions. At the end of the day, one of the biggest bits of feedback we get from the providers is they don't want to have a house with 4 or 5 participants in there. So a lot of the projects we're getting are just 2-bedroom and auxiliary, so a 1-bedroom, or a 3x2 maximum, but with enough space for them to have their own room. So it's designed in a way that it's better for the participants, and you're never generally going to breach those rules of having too many people on site with a limited number of rooms.
Do you find that the providers who come to you prefer the community residence model?
It's the providers aren't necessarily affected by the community residence model unless we're building directly for them, in which case it will affect where they're going, because at the end of the day they're effectively our client at that point as well as the provider, which means you can be up for 25 to 50k per room in infrastructure charges if they don't go down that path. So you could potentially save $100,000 in infrastructure charges plus the DA wait times and costs associated with that. Yeah, so we see it as the preferred method if you're not fully intent on subdividing the block and having 2 individual residences.
So if an investor came to you with a block of land in Chermside, do you say to them, well, you can do community residence product or a standard 4-bed, 4-bath kind of product? Do you present both options, or do you ask why? Do you go through that process?
No, not necessarily. I mean, we ask all of the questions. We're finding the people that are coming to us with their infill sites have either built a group home before somewhere and they've realised that probably wasn't the best option for them, maybe not have had enough provider feedback before they started, things like that. And they're coming to us on their second round to, I suppose, refine what mistakes they had made, probably have listened a little bit more, realised that spending a little bit more upfront for the long-term benefit is in their interest. So,
yeah. So, Ben, you've been in this game for 3 or 4 years now. You've been studying it and delivering product. What are the disconnects or the flaws with the way SDA and NDAs work in the marketplace with regards to demand, supply, participant requirements, and as we discussed offline already? What have you seen the last few years that just doesn't click well with you,
Yeah, I suppose as I mentioned to you, we started out our model, with a standard plan, able to sell to mum and dad investors and go down that path. What we noticed very quickly was the locations that were being requested by the providers were not in the areas that were easily accessible from a cost perspective, from a land availability perspective. It was very challenging. So if you're trying to keep in mind the provider and you're trying to keep in mind the investor, we found it very difficult to make things stack up at a client's expected return. The 10% and the 12% we saw very quickly were not going to be as achievable in city areas than they are in, say, Ipswich, Logan, those sorts of places. But also, as I said, you're better off having your property tenanted at 8% than you are at,
Zero?
At 0% if you don't have, yeah.
So I guess from a outside perspective, Ben, I'm seeing you as more of an outcome-driven builder than an income-driven builder, correct?
Yeah, 100%. And that comes down to having respect for the NDIS scheme as well and the people that are going to be living in the homes. It's something that we learnt at the very beginning. If you're not listening to the provider, then you're not providing what they want, and inevitably you're going to have issues with tenanting the property. If we listen from the beginning, we have an understanding that we're not building homes for every able-bodied person. We're building homes for people with disability, changes the way you think about the design. It changes the way you think about how they would be living. And even though it may be better than the current positions they may be in, whether it be at hospital or aged care or something like that, it can still be done better. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a personal business question here, and I want you to think hard about this answer because it's being transparent here. If you are a custom builder who is very bespoke and focused on delivery of the outcome for participants and families, which is a great thing, by the way, it's very hard to find businesses like yourselves, right? The fact that you've built 15 already built SDAs around South East Queensland and 4 more underway now under construction, that's roughly 19 there. How many have you turned away because your values don't align with the investors' requirement? That's the question I'm asking. How many have you turned away?
I couldn't tell you an exact number, but
roughly,
I would say we would have turned away 30 people. That's physically turning away, but I suppose the difference is we could have gone out. I've got obviously a lot of relationships with a lot of developers over the years, and we could have gone out and packaged every block we could get our hands on, and I could have sold them tomorrow. So it wasn't so much the fact that you'd be turning people away. It's more the fact that you're not even choosing to entertain that path because it's purely just for the money. At the end of the day, they weren't hard to sell. Everyone you spoke to, I could get them over the line with the returns. You could be looking at a 4 to 5% return, or you could be looking at a 10 to 12% return, and it's a no-brainer. That just didn't sit with us, so that's why we pivoted where we were going.
Yep. I think for our listeners to hear both yourself and myself, Ben, talk about this, it's good to know from a client, participant, and provider point of view, knowing that even the builder knows when they say no, right? Because we know, you and I both know, Ben, really out there, if a builder can get the job, they'll get the job. They'll take every job that they can just to make money. Let's be honest,
100%.
Right? And it takes a lot of guts and a lot of determination to say to someone, no, I don't want your business. And any line of work, let alone being a builder, which is a very tough industry to crack right now post-COVID. Lack of trade, lack of blocks, lack of business. So I commend you and Marcus, your business partner, on staying firm. And this was very clear to me when I met you almost 3 years ago that this is the way your business was run. You're not going to let investors or other agents dictate how SDA should be delivered to the marketplace. And I think it's great that you guys have really committed to being more of a bespoke custom builder and doing what's right for the market and what's right for participants and their families. So congratulations to you, mate.
Thank you.
But moving on, what have you seen out there, not necessarily yourself, but where it doesn't work, that people gotten it wrong? You guys have gone very slow in your process in preliminary designs, quotes, custom designs and contracts and engineering reports and SDA assessors, assessments and logic and all that kind of stuff. That's a bit of a process there. As you said, 10 weeks to get them all rolling there and another seven months plus to build a house. You don't cut corners. It's obvious to me. But for our listeners, when they're dealing with the wrong builder who is trying to build quickly and cut corners and saying what you want to hear as an investor, what can go wrong? Tell me, Ben.
I mean, yeah, we've walked through a couple of other building companies' homes mid-construction and seen the issues that they're having, kitchens ripped out, garage doors ripped out, all different types of things. But I think the issue is when you're trying to turn SDA into a volume investment companies and go down the cookie cutter path, you end up falling into the same traps that a lot of building companies do when they are taking 10 blocks here, packaging them all up. They're not looking at the land. They're not taking things into consideration before they start, and they come unstuck. The certifier says, nope, you've got setback issues here. You've got BAL issues here. Oh, we haven't accounted for this. The cost increases. Client, inevitably gets frustrated when they're hit with $20,000 worth of costs at the end. I suppose for us, we work closely with our access consultants. We work closely with our certifiers, our town planners. All of this is done up front. Our designers, are crucial. They are involved in every process from the very beginning. When you've got that many people looking over your projects, you tend to set yourself off on the right foot from the very beginning, as opposed to scratching your head and wondering why something popped up later that could be very costly as far as time or money.
Wise words. Ben, we have an event coming up next in February, and we'd like to attend, to invite you as well. What is your opinion about the missed misinformation is probably a wrong word, misinformation, lack of transparency, lack of too much disconnect between the SIL world of, and I say those words very loosely here, plan writers, local area coordinators, social workers, OTs, support coordinators, SIL providers, SDA providers, hospital discharge services. There's just so many people in that conveyor belt to get participants out the door, fully approved and ready to go towards the end result, which is a built and compliant SDA product. What have you seen from your experience? It's the challenges of that whole process, Ben. You tell me, you tell us.
Yeah, I suppose the disconnect that we realised, and once again, we realised this early. I met a provider when we first started doing this because I knew that this whole process was not going to work without a solid partnership with a provider. And then you realise you probably need multiple, you need this and that. You start speaking with them, you start learning what they want, where they want it, how much they need, all those types of questions. And you realise that the disconnect comes when, I suppose, the product that they need and require is not what's being built in the market. It's not what's being, shown or presented as a house and land package to an investor or, mum and dad that's, looking to build a new home and they're looking at a volume builder or cookie cutter home. They're not getting what they need. So I feel like the disconnect comes from the providers wanting to make sure that their participants get the best outcome for them, the best living circumstances they could possibly have. And then from whether it be a investor or agent or builder that's wanting to go and, make a buck or make a quick deal or make the best percentage return they can get without considering both options, then the disconnect happens there. So that's why the open communication needs to be happening from the start with all parties, with reliable timelines, everything that you could possibly think about the home, you do it up front so that there's no surprises come the end of the build and you're sitting there with vacancies. So,
Yep. So of your 15 builds I've already completed, 6 are full accessible, FA, and 9 are HPS, high physical support, and 0 are robust. Interesting. Why 0 robust?
It's not through lack of feedback from providers requesting this. As I mentioned earlier, I've got a lot of developer contacts. There's a lot of provider contacts in there as well. There's a lot of feedback saying that you need to have the right block of land in the right area for them, firstly, to want to tenant the properties because they understand some of the conflict that can come with robust housing. So if you don't have the right block of land, whether it be sitting more isolated, a corner block near parkland or very particular, you need a very particular appetite for robust. And then from an investor's perspective, the stories are quite endless with what happens to the homes physically. So we tend to advise people to go with the high physical support route, even though providers are requesting robust homes. I feel in the best interest of our client, you would be putting that information forward as far as if you find the right block of land, you find the provider that is on board with that block of land to build robust, we will build it. But it's not going to be the first port of call when I'm advising somebody if they ask for it. So
yes,
yeah,
totally understand. Okay, any words of advice that you have to any of our investor listeners to this podcast on how they should begin their process, their journey in SDA, what to look out for, who to talk to, what to avoid, just any advice that you have to our listeners? I
suppose research. It's very easy for people to get caught up in the hype of a 10% return and jump in with their eyes closed. One of the other reasons we stopped doing, I suppose, selling of these as house and land packages is a lot of people you would speak with, maybe their first SDA home, they may know nothing about it. And there is a long process of education, as it was for us to learn how to build these. It takes a lot of time to really understand what the risk versus reward is. So I think doing as much research as you can on your own or with somebody who's been in the industry for a long time, listening to what they say, doing your own research at home, and understanding the risk versus reward is key, I think. You can't do enough planning and due diligence before you make the step.
Ben, at the very start of your journey that you and Marcus did you do a lot of education and mentoring of investors just to ensure that they knew what they'll get themselves into? Was that a burden that you took on board yourself?
Oh, 100%, and that comes down to the ethical side of things. It's so easy to sell something at 10%. What's really hard is to look at your clients in the eyes once the home's built and they're getting 0%, So in our interest to make sure that our clients are very aware of what they're getting themselves into, educating them on the process, making sure they understand that this is, yes, it's a great investment for them to have, but it is also a home for somebody with disabilities, and to respect that process and why we're doing it. There is a greater good above the investment aspect. I think all of that's quite important. So
Gotcha. I just want to touch on one last thing here. 2-story design SDAs. We don't really hear about that much very often in the marketplace. Why is this a concept you've thought about, and have you delivered any 2 stories, and are you working on any 2 stories?
Yeah, no, we haven't delivered any 2 stories. We've been down the path of design, full design, ready to construct. But when it comes to quoting, obviously the projects are quite expensive. So it becomes a challenge at that point to get the physical funding. The returns on them are fantastic still. They work out to be substantially higher than the group home, but you need to be able to afford them. You're looking in that 4 million mark, things like that, before you can play in the game. And
But you're talking about projects which are 2-3 levels, which are units.
Yes, correct.
I'm talking about just a double-story house with a lift. I mean, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, once again, we've built 1 2-story, but the top story was not SDA, so lift is not required. It's more for the family members to live in, with all SDA downstairs. But as for a 2-story unit with lift, it can be done, but your price points are still in that sort of $2 million, $2.5 million mark for a 6-bedroom, complex. So they're great projects. We want to build, more of them. We've been down the path far enough to to nearly build them, and we've got a good understanding of how to do it. We just need the people that can get it over the line.
So if I can summarize, if I can walk away from this podcast here, my tag words would be building for families, building for providers, design, construct, custom builder, and infill areas around South East Queensland, and knockdown rebuilds. I mean, they would be my summary of your business. Would you?
Yeah. Yep. Certainly. Yep.
Anything else I've missed out on that little summary there? Those words?
No.
Yeah.
No. I think you've done a good job.
Yeah, because most other builders in SDA, they don't play in the infill and double story and the families and the build for providers and the knockdown rebuild. They don't do that kind of stuff. No.
Yeah.
The path of least resistance for them is going to the greenfields estates and just build out there, and hope that they will come, as they say.
Yeah. We want to go with the opposite, and that's how the investor should be looking at it. They should be looking at it from exact opposite way. They would generally go on and buy an investment property. People are so used to buying standard investment properties, tenanting them out, having no issues, especially at the moment in this market. But when you're looking at SDA, you think about it a little bit back to front, what they need, what we need to design, what we need to build, and you'll have a successful project.
Last question. Of those 15 builds you finished, SDAs, was there much of a valuation shortfall for settlements, completion, and handover for those ones? No,
really, not too much at all. There was a patch there where the lending tightened up again, and there was some shortfalls, but you're looking at 20K, which you'd be finding on a standard investment property in most cases. So, but 90% of the properties came in on valuation.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for your time. Look forward to hopefully seeing you at the event coming up at this NDAs Housing Collaboration event we're holding with a large steel provider called Blue Wing. If you're not there, at least your business partner Marcus will be there as well. And hopefully you can stay safe. And we'll publish this podcast roughly at the same time or just before you head off overseas. So that way, if anyone who comes to the event doesn't see you, they can listen to this podcast audio of yourself as well, yeah. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Cheers, bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.